Welcome to the Sacred Window podcast. My name is Christine Devlinek. The Sacred Window refers to the tender, magical, and remarkable weeks following the birth of a baby. A birth giver is forever changed. Recognizing that this time is too often overlooked and misunderstood in our modern culture, we're setting out to be part of a voice for change and growth. We're growing awareness and broadening the reach of conscious postpartum care. Our podcast features friends and colleagues as interviewers. We're a loving community united by a common passion to change the paradigm of postpartum care to one that honors women, birth givers, babies, and families. We're glad you're here.
And I will never be the same again.
Welcome to the Sacred Window podcast. I am Christine. I'm so happy to be spending this time in the sacred container with two dear people to me who I really look up to. And I'm feeling so blessed that they have come into my life through the Center for Sacred Window Studies. I have Gallucci and Stacey Ramsower with me today. Stacey is a full spectrum doula. She is a trauma-informed yoga instructor, a somatic sex educator, an Ayurvedic postpartum doula. She's the founder of the Sacred Body podcast and so many more amazing things, really. Like, it's hard to pin down all the different things I could say about Stacey. Stacey, I'm going to share your mission because this is really beautiful to me. Stacey is committed to supporting women reclaiming those parts of themselves that have been shunned, rejected, and silenced. Through teaching, mentorship, doula support, and hands-on sessions, she holds space for slowing down the proverbial pendulum in order to reset the physical, emotional, and spiritual baseline to a place of intimate inner trust. Stacey can be found at staceyramsower.com. Stacey is spelled Stacey, which I want to clarify. And her Instagram is sacredbody_Stacey Ramsower. And Gal, oh my goodness, Gal Gallucci is a public speaker, an educator, a somatic sexologist, exclusive erotic blueprints coach, which I love, postpartum doula. Gal, I am going to share a bit of your mission, which is so stunning. Gal supports clients into the remembrance of their own body's wisdom. Somatic tools interrupt old narrative in the mental realm, and presence, safety, guidance, experiencing builds new neural pathways to expand into one's truth, embodiment, and empowerment. Gal can be found at venusnoir.com, and her Instagram is venus_noir007. And today I have called these amazing women together with me in this shared space because September is Sexual Health Awareness Month. Both of these brilliant women work with somatic sex education and tools for really experiencing oneself in a way that our society does not allow for. And so I am honored to have you both. Thank you for being here.
It's such an honor. Thank you so much for having me, Christine.
I'm thrilled to be here, and it's so nice to hear things read back to me and feel this like reinvigoration of, oh yeah, there's so much life and vitality in this work. And what an honor to be with Gal and with you, Christine, a powerhouse in your own right.
I think that when I go through, our calendar, and there was just like this really loud, clear bell that was like, I need to get Gal and Stacey to have this conversation. I think it's a calling that I always try to listen very closely to when something is ringing like that. And in preparing for this conversation today, I just want to start by appreciating so much how both of you have been really drawn to postpartum health, caring for people during the postpartum window, and how that is so interconnected with our sexual health, our sexual connection with ourselves, and how that shifts as we become mothers. And all the places, we talked a little bit before this conversation began, and Gal, you were, talking about how it's really this very repressed place that I almost wonder if there's fear of really opening up into what the connection between motherhood and sexuality really looks like. And so I would love to hear from each of you, a little bit about how you've really been drawn to postpartum care, because I think that's kind of come after the work that you've already done with somatic work. And yeah, I just would love to hear from each of you on how that has linked for you. Stacey, would you like to go first?
Yeah, and just so people who are listening are clear, I have my 6-month-old daughter on my lap, so that's some of the background noise. My path in, I guess, where I'm currently began with my own miscarriage. That was my first pregnancy known to me, and it shook me to my core. And for the first time in my life, my physical body was sort of out of my control. And it led me to study Ayurveda for women's health, and started my somatic sex educator training. And I did postpartum care training with Rochelle Garcia-Saliga, innate postpartum care, and an intimacy educator training with Catherine and Jesse, who's one of the primary faculty for the somatic sex educator training that I did. And I'm certain that Gal knows Catherine as well. And something that became really clear to me was this initiation of pregnancy, regardless of how it ends, is transformative in a way that's really impossible to describe in words, because it is so physical and it is so spiritual. Like, there's a very subtle level to it, and there's this very tangible, physical, visceral change that happens. And it sort of opened my eyes to a much deeper reality about sex that I think is easy to bypass. And certainly our culture bypasses it, of being this profound, obviously physical act, and also very subtle. And sexual energy is fundamental to our being in a body. And it's also a connection to beyond this physical body. And so the parallel between motherhood, birth, postpartum healing, and sexuality was sort of glaringly obvious to me. And it started actually when I was doing, I put those two pieces together when I was only doing birth support as a doula. And I thought I was going to be a midwife. And I started meeting with all these couples. They were interviewing me to see if they wanted me to be their doula. And I was like, oh, I think I should be a sex therapist, because that's actually what I wanted to spend more time talking about, how our sexuality and our relationship to intimacy and partnership, and asking for what we need and being totally stripped bare in an emotional way, is key to this birthing process. And then, of course, I became a mother and realized that all this work that I've done as a somatic sex educator, my own personal study and work in supporting other people, is not irrelevant. But after having babies myself, I do also feel like I'm starting from scratch. And I think that's part of our conversation today, is that it's very, very, very vulnerable, because we don't have a strong cultural framework for talking about sex. And you have to start from scratch in the postpartum window, in your postpartum time. And it's sort of like, well, where the hell do I go? Who do I even, and I know Gal, you have something to say about this, like, who do I even talk to? Can I talk about this? Is it okay to ask a question? So I, in a roundabout way, I think I answered your question, Christine, but yeah, I'll leave it there for Gal to chime in.
Sure. So, Christine, I would love for you to ask the question again. Ask the question again, just so I can be real clear in my response.
Of course.
If you don't.
I'm thinking about the natural pull that each of you felt to move towards postpartum caregiving, because not everybody is drawn to that aspect of sexuality and how we embody that once we become parents. So I want you to take that idea and that question anywhere you feel called to have it go. But that's the link that I am highlighting is the work that you've done with somatic sex education and your natural pull to postpartum caregiving.
Sure. So yeah, I'm finding myself saying very often that essentially I've become the professional and the practitioner that I always dreamed of. And I have been on this journey of motherhood for just a little over 2 decades, half my life. I became a mother at 22 and then had my second child at 23 and I also have an 8.5-year-old son. So there's a lot of spaciousness that I also had in exploring resources. And I always felt extremely curious and also connected to an inner voice and my intuition telling me that the model that is provided in our societal structure really lacks a lot of answers that I was searching for. And so I actually, when my 2 older children were infants and toddlers, I studied and became a lactation consultant. I was curious. I had a lot of curiosities about breastfeeding them. And so I became a lactation consultant and was providing services at local health clinics, at women and children WIC clinics, and working in the public health sector here in New Mexico. I was also simultaneously studying cultural anthropology at the University of New Mexico. And my curiosity, again, just like what's missing in our medical model? And through my research, the 2 very, very clear answers in regards to women's sexual and reproductive health is access to resources around the postpartum period, 4th trimester, and sexual health. And then exploring that even deeper, I'm like, why is it in our model that they're 2 opposing ends of the spectrum when they're actually completely integrated? Our reproductive health and our sexual health are intimately interwoven. So, it's been an ongoing just assessment of like the lack of resources, remaining really curious and exploring the ways that I could resource myself as a mother, and then resource the women in my community on their journey. I actually was really focused in, as I mentioned, lactation consultant, working in the public health sector. I'm a licensed massage therapist since 2007. I taught the pregnancy massage curriculum for 10 years at a local massage therapy school. And then studied somatic sexology a couple years ago, and realized that I needed to marry my skill set as a somatic sexology with the 4th trimester. So it's been all over the place, and yet it feels like it's held in this really sacred vessel. So that's kind of where I'm at. That's where I've arrived at this point in my journey.
I find listening to both of you talk about your journeys, it's such a beautiful unfolding of just life as we live it. I love how you were describing how when you were having your first 2 children and when they were becoming a little bit older, you felt like you had a need to go into lactation consulting as a natural response to maybe the support that you felt you needed and you weren't getting with them. And I love hearing stories of people sort of answering their own needs in a way to give to other people. And I find that in itself is such a healing way of navigating through our own challenges, is taking some autonomy and taking some choice and creating clarity and understanding and awareness and knowledge, and then offering that of service to other people. So yeah, that's just so beautiful. I find that a lot actually in listening to the reasons why people come to postpartum care as an example, when we realize how, oh gosh, I mean, I don't even know if there's a word. It's just not there. And so we enter into this place. For some of us, I speak for myself right now, with a feeling of just betrayal, that I didn't know so much of what, I mean, so many people have gone through this path before. Why didn't I know that it was going to be a certain way? So yes, I just am seeing in both of you this beautiful path of sort of answering your inner call, and each step along your way, and each training, each area of exploration that you felt a call to go into, it's built upon the last one until we just become a more rounded human being with attunement to our own calling and our own selves. It's beautiful.
As you're speaking, Christine, one of the threads that weaves together, sexuality and the postpartum time for me in my learning, it's like realizing how much of my own association with sexuality had to do with the physical act of sex itself. And then uncoupling that and figuring out like, oh, those are actually distinct things. My sexuality is actually separate from the physical act of sex, whether with myself or with a partner, and all that's sort of hidden in that space. But then as I began to work with sexuality and the lessons around consent and desire and giving voice to my desires and voice to my boundaries, it's a perfect preparation for birth, whatever kind of birth you intend to have, but also this postpartum window, because in my experience, it really prepared me to get underneath this block I had around it needing to make sense, my desire needing to make sense, my boundary needing to make sense, when in truth, it doesn't have to make sense, it simply is. And can I engage in a mature conversation with my partner about what I would like and what I am not available for, and feel confident in those desires and boundaries? And when it comes to postpartum, it is such a departure from rational, straightforward life experience, feelings, that while, there's a lot, like I said before, that I feel like I am building from the ground up, I have this foundational tool of at least some strengthened sense of trust in my own intuition, needs, and boundaries.
That's so powerful. I think being able to use the skills that you have experienced and developed in one area of autonomy and understanding yourself, and being able to reflect that into sort of a no man's land of, the postpartum window, or, it could be a different time that feels just more unexperienced before and that we may not have, is so powerful.
Sure. And what I believe Stacey is pointing to as well is just this really foundational piece in our work as somatic sexologists and sex educators, to teach consent and agency. And I think that's foundational. It's absolutely foundational, not only like for nervous system health, for our safety, for our embodiment and our empowerment. And so providing those tools, especially during the sacred window, where, as you point to often, Christine, is a time in our lives where we're so vulnerable to like subtle energies and a disruption in our energetic field, right? To have the resources of what our sacred yes and our sacred no is in that time, and how to even identify like the inquiry of, when am I ready to become sexually active again in my postpartum period? And it's, certainly contraindicated within 6 weeks, let's say, at a very, very minimum. But I mean, even if 3 months out, 90 days out, 6 months out, if you're still wrestling with that inquiry, somatic sex educator can come in and really assist you in consent and agency and boundaries and felt sensation, sense in your body of what that is and how to give voice to it. I think it's a really important piece to the work that we're doing. Yeah.
Particularly when this is a time, or this is a type of system that we exist within in terms of the medical model, where, the underlying idea is that we get told what is best for us, and we are directed into what others will do for us in order to take care of us. It takes a lot of practice on the effort of, doulas and people who are trained in helping people find their voice, such as yourselves, for us to feel secure and comfortable and confident in that voice. But I think that, that's an example in terms of sort of a systemic issue, but how does that filter through and affect the way that we feel like we have agency and our voice in more intimate areas that are not necessarily governed by a system? And I think about, relationships. Not all relationships between couples feels like there is space for sharing voice and sharing agency. I would love to hear a little bit from you about how you help people find that, whether it's as a couple or whether it's as an individual.
Well, as you were speaking, I was thinking, actually it's about replacing our ideas of what our role and responsibility is with consent and agency, approaching and navigating our our exploration in the postpartum period back into sexual activity, I would like to see my clients arrive to that place without a sense of duty, right? Without of like, well, this is my role, this is my responsibility. I've got to, be the good wife, or that's like, that's our agreement in our marriage or in our relationship. And sure, there is some truth to that agreement in an intimate relationship, but to arrive to it embodied with agency and with a real connection to your felt sense of yes or no. There are some somatic games that we play. There is a model that I'm sure Stacey's very familiar with Betty Martin, Will of Consent, which explores 4 different quadrants of touch. And it asks the question, like, who's the touch for instance? Who's receiving, who's giving, who's allowing, who's absorbing. I implement just different somatic tools and experiences for my clients to really get that sense in their bodies of when they're ready, what they're ready for, and how to establish, agency and boundaries. And I would love for you to chime in, Stacey, if you have some thoughts around this and what maybe experiences you provide as well.
Yeah, I mean, Betty Martin, the queen. When I'm working with anyone, but particularly with birth clients, I think it's essential that they start playing the 3-minute game really early on. The 3-minute game is sort of like a precursor to the full wheel of consent, but it essentially is a process in which you set a timer for 3 minutes with your partner and decide who's giving and who's receiving. And the person who's receiving gets to ask for what they want. And there are layers to it, but one thing I really like about it is that it's an opportunity to practice non-goal oriented touch. So this is not foreplay. This is not something we do on our way to sex. This is something we do to simply, purely engage. What do I want? I'm going to ask for it. Now let's negotiate how I get it. And also be in that kind of vulnerable space of, checking in with your partner about the touch you're giving them. Is this what you want? And being open to receiving their feedback. Actually, I don't like that. Could you do it softer? Could you do it faster? Because in the postpartum time, like this work can happen in the postpartum time and be really supportive and really empowering. But it's also like everything has been blown apart for both partners in the relationship. And so I think there are just lots of layers of complexity. And it is a lot more supportive to start these conversations before there's a brand new baby, before there are issues regarding, is the overwhelm that is breastfeeding, the overwhelm that is healing from your birth, the overwhelm that is being the partner who's working outside of the house to sustain the family, and etc. All the stress that comes with building your new family and sustaining this new reality. So, of course, like I said, those tools can be used at any time, but it's so valuable to get it done before everyone is spread so thin. And so in that time, the postpartum window, when most people are feeling spread really, really thin, the principle of titration comes into play really strongly, just a little bit at a time, speaking to the nervous system health gal. And that's, essentially what somatic is referring to. When you've got somatic sex education, it means of the body-based, but it's nervous system oriented. So can we give just enough to start to create a change in pattern, just enough charge, just enough contact, just enough effort, right? That's why the 3-minute game, like here is a very boundaried amount of time. It's pretty short. Not really enough time to get like worked up. And then we stop and we let that settle and we talk about it later and move gradually. And there's this larger conversation of we're just a quick fix culture in every area of life. This sustained rest period that postpartum requires is brushed off as meaningless or, not for me. I don't need that. And it's hard to, I think, give credence to these ancient teachings sometimes because there's no example of it. We don't have, we're not inheriting this wisdom from the generation that came just before us, or even 2 generations ago. This is like ancient stuff that's almost been forgotten. And a lot of us are learning about it through like almost hearsay or through the intellect. It's not been shown. So I think that there's a lot of work to be done in terms of how this information gets passed down, of like just living it. Just living it is so powerful. Just being, to your point earlier, Christine, not to go on for too much longer, but how many people come to this work in the midst of their own healing crisis or because of their own driving need? And I feel like I've been a powerful educator and mentor and support because I've learned all of this through my own body, through my own need. And it's very potent stuff. Like there's a David Frawley quote that I love so much. He talks about the yogi as Agni, as the transformational fire. And with the somatic work, when it is like I've done the work to heal my own system, like to establish something like baseline, and just being with a client, or in this space, we're virtual, but like being together, there's a kind of alchemy happening because of how we show up in our bodies and with this wisdom in every breath, every word, etc. So yeah, I think doing the work is a critical part of how I support people.
It's so interesting, the idea, or sort of the emphasis. Somatic is really talking about the nervous system and how the nervous system is so indicative of how we are able to show up for ourselves in life, for our relationships and lives, for our children. And to your comment a little bit earlier about how this culture is one of instant results. We want to see instantaneous shifts. We want to take medicine and have our illnesses disappear. We want to have our babies and then get back to our lives. Yet our nervous systems are not designed in that manner. We need to start to think about how it feels to be really slow. And I think in our sexual health, whether we are looking at that through the lens of pre-family, postpartum, or sort of coming out of a sacred window and ready to move into a new space of feeling sexual and being sexually aware and healthy and comfortable, the nervous system always is going to require slowness and gentleness and step-by-step integration at every point. And certainly, there's like a million links that I'm drawing lines to, feeling the best that we can during the sacred window. But my gosh, that's what it's all about.
A real common theme that that I see with my clients is, and breastfeeding moms, is a real change in how they want their breasts to be touched, or maybe not at all, because they're nursing and there's constant stimulation, and the sensation in their breast tissue and their nipples is completely different. And I really love, again, 20 years ago when I was a lactation consultant, I was hearing these concerns, a little less, but sometimes they showed up. And I didn't have the studies or the information to resource my clients. I had the A&P and all the information to provide breastfeeding resources, but I didn't know how to address that concern. And as a sex educator and somatic sexologist, now again, working with consent and with agency and this felt sensation, we can become curious about that exploration. So maybe you don't want your partner to kiss, suck, touch your breasts, but what about, the exploration of perhaps, and this could even be like healing. What if like you have a crystal, maybe you even put it in like the fridge or the freezer, and your lover can caress it on your breast tissue. Therefore, it becomes like therapeutic and, is even maybe addressing any like lymph that might be stagnant. And you're creating a container where there's bonding and there's exploration and there's curiosity, but there's not a specific outcome that you're attached to. And you're also no longer internalizing that something must be wrong with you and that you're not meeting an expectation. And it also really honors your partner, who still very much wants to connect with your breasts and is super attracted and like needs that bonding. But instead of the rejection being there and it being a hard no, you move into a place of exploration and, just bring in different sensation tools. Like what could possibly be a yes and something to explore and enjoy for both of you. So that just came to mind.
It's so beautiful because I think it actually gives the gift of when people can sort of relax and feel safe with one another in order to look outside of the way that it has always been done for them. It's very beautiful and sort of Ayurvedic in a way of like, what are the qualities that I actually need right now as everything is feeling a little bit different. I need softer, I need slower, I need gentler, and all of that can be amazing and not scary.
Yeah, I've found there to be a lot of room for growth for myself in reframing my experience of how my sexuality and my desire is changing from this initial feeling of like almost feeling defeated, or like really like some part of me is like dead, never to return again, and actually finding some delight and curiosity, at least in the fact that there is this new part of me emerging, like something new to give voice to, something new to express in myself. And honestly, a simplicity that I'm really appreciating in my adult years. Like in whatever way we've sort of edified our sexual identity in our mind, there's definitely a loss. Like, I think it's important to acknowledge a feeling of loss that is just part of postpartum. And then also the coming back to the slowness, if we're able to give ourselves time and our relationship time and our partner time to adjust to this new reality, like these tools that you so beautifully articulated, Gal, and I wish everybody could have seen you like grabbing your beautiful crystal and grabbing a feather. Like there are all of these tools that can bring some delight and play back to what might be feeling stagnant or heavy or tense. Like it has been difficult, even as someone who's an educator in this field, to articulate exactly why this is difficult. Why I'm having a hard time even discerning what it is my body wants, what would feel good in my body, because it's so different, even from child 1 to child 2. And so at the very least, to engage with your partner, to do some of this work outside of the bed. Not that that's the only place you're ever intimate with your partner, but just, the proverbial bed, I think, is also an important piece to remember, so that it's not like when things are already stimulated, when you're already perhaps in a heightened state in your body, but to be able to have these conversations, like when you're sitting on the floor watching a movie or a commercial break in the, nighttime TV show that you watch, when you're on a walk, to engage this conversation of what might be nice or something I'd like to try, or would you be open to? And the process of giving ourselves space and time and our partners space and time to make this adaptation in the postpartum of how we're engaging sex. It's just like more space and time. Go slow.
As I'm listening to you, Stacey, if I think that there is a very real, due to sort of the disconnect of feeling really connected with our own agency as sexual beings, no matter where we are in life, due to, I think, sort of societal messaging and expectations of self, and maybe, the way that people have grown up, really feeling comfortable or uncomfortable with their own bodies or sexuality as a topic that can even really be talked about out loud. I think that the comfort levels of couples, getting to that place for so many people may actually take some working up to. And I'm curious about how, people can really start to do their own inner connection to even feel comfortable voicing those in a journal to themselves, or starting to really feel like they have the language and the words and the understanding clear to really make it feel good for themselves first, and then being able to approach their partner with a conversation that can involve both of them.
Some tools that have sort of showed up along the way, that I found helpful, and I love that you said journaling, because it is sort of that personal, just like pen to paper inquiry. My husband and I were in a group called Centering with a midwifery group, and the questions were less sexual, but some examples were like, what was the dynamic like between your parents growing up? Did you see affection exchanged often between your parents? Who, was responsible for the discipline in your house? And it was these questions that were very provocative, and also a part of it was like, what would you like to carry forward in your own relationship as a family? And honestly, starting with those questions that, again, were less obviously sexual, I found really, really helpful, because it all informs how we are seeking intimate contact. And sex is simply an extension of that. So how we, were shown how to be, even intimacy exchanged between my parents and their friends. I had this conversation with my husband recently. Like, I loved that I saw growing up, when my parents' friends would come over, like kisses were exchanged. And just like, a greeting of intimacy between men and women that was platonic. And it was nothing to be afraid of, or not this sense of like, don't show too much, don't get, there wasn't fear or tension around being in your sexuality as just a natural part of being an expressive human person. But certainly getting to the root of some of these things that would easily be overlooked in terms of a conversation just about sex, I think is really important. There's a great book that I'm sure you're familiar with, Gal, called The Erotic Mind by Dr. Jack Morin. Is it Jack Morin? That has this like sexual assessment survey in the back, and going through that for myself was really useful. And I'll say this as sort of a end cap. I think it's important to not expect your partner to do or want to do all the same things that you do or want to do in your own journey to finding your way back to or way forward with your sexuality and intimacy. Like, reading all these books and having all these deep conversations is my jam. It is not my husband's jam. And things got a lot better when I relieved him of that pressure to keep up with me and taking all these classes and reading all these things. So that's important. Like, it's important that you each find your way. And couples therapy before the baby shows up has really been a huge gift in my marriage. So if that's an option or a possibility or a curiosity, finding a great provider for your relationship, I think, is critical. A place where you can both go and be seen and heard by an impartial third party.
Thank you so much, Stacey. Gal, I would love to hear from you on this too, in terms of, really finding oneself, whether it's after the transition of becoming a mother or a parent, or not. Maybe it's just coming to a place of confidence and connection within ourselves, to give us a foundation to then invite somebody else into the conversation.
Mm-hmm. I think really staying in the inquiry of your animal body. You'll never be any closer or more intimate to your animal body than in your birthing process, in your prenatal period, in labor, delivery. And then evolution and Mother Nature has provided us the lingering of that ecstatic state, that, birth energy and sexual energy are essentially the same altered consciousness. And then we have, our breastfeeding that is intact for bliss and for bonding to occur over and over again, to maintain at a biochemical level, like that drip of ecstatic state and altered consciousness. And I think that there's a real incredible opportunity to create like the artistry of bonding in that period, not just for the mother and the child, but for the relationship. If you are coupled and you're in a relationship, I think exploring it from a place of bonding is really probably the most fundamental space of success for you and your partner. And it can also really interrupt patterns. Maybe neither one of you were especially satisfied or with your sex life. And especially if it was really patterned, here's this amazing opportunity to create like this foundational level of exploration, of curiosity, of safety, of consent, of boundaries, and being in this place of like meeting each other's needs without a specific outcome or the pressure of it resulting in penetrative sex and an orgasm. There's also an opportunity to reframe what sex is, as like Stacey was speaking to. So I would just encourage a lot of curiosity, really connecting with the animal body, attuning to how incredible we are equipped, especially in this time, for bonding, what's happening in our hormones and our biochemistry. And what a beautiful opportunity to like nourish that ecstatic altered state that we're in. The veil is so thin in this time. So I think it's a superpower that we can connect to instead of, we can change the narrative into like, I'm like, it's, we can change the narrative from like suffering to this really deep exploration. And if you're single, you can still do all of this. You can connect to your animal body. You can connect with your baby, your children, your sisters, your caretakers, it's limitless. It doesn't need to be limited to a romantic partner. Yeah, that's what I would say about this time.
Oh, I love everything about that. Some things that are coming to my mind as I was listening to you is, the connection between what we experience during birth, and just, the altered consciousness. And I think that that's one way of really accessing, sort of inviting back that empowered place. If we've been able to experience an empowered birth, that's a place that we can draw a connection for creating access to empowered sexual experience and sort of broadening the understanding of what that even means. And there was so much there that you just shared, but the artistry of bonding is something like you should write a book with that title. That's like so beautiful, because I think it really creates a point of access and a potentially much less intimidating understanding of what it means to experience connection with ourselves and with the people that we love, even thinking about it in terms of, my sisters, my babies, my children, my loved ones, so far beyond. And yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing all of that. The sacred window is an idea that we can all find ourselves in need of during times of our lives where we are tender, in need of extra care, and transforming our understanding of self. The concepts of care we give to new parents can be applied to ourselves in honor of ourselves to build resilience and grace in how we navigate this life. Yeah, I think that, as we sort of were thinking about moving into this conversation, and I know that both of us kind of had a similar feeling to name the social repression piece that takes work to disengage from, whether it's through just finding the freedom to be a sexual being, or finding the support to have a baby and not fall apart, because that's what sort of the norm seems to be. I'm curious about, you've talked a little bit about each of your journeys, but how have you sort of witnessed the social repression piece, or the way that our systems are set up, in a way that you've been able to move through? And I know that it's like a practice, I think. Stacey, you mentioned before feeling like you are a better support person to others because you've been able to do the work yourself. And Gal, you've spoken to that too. But, I think looking to you two as really, a support model, and how others can access a more balanced place of being in terms of sexual connection with self and the people we want to be intimate with. How have you been able to identify a socially repressive piece that was standing in your way, and how have you been able to move it aside to not feel the oppressiveness of that?
Don't know if I have a clean answer, but certainly just the awareness that the repression is there, and my own lifelong struggle with like being the good girl and being a people pleaser and doing it right, and giving away so much of my power in that, where if like a choice that I made that felt good to me was questioned by someone else, suddenly I would question myself, change my mind, or change course. And it really takes a lot of fortitude to stay committed to our choices and our vision and our sense of what's right, when we don't have a lot of reinforcement, either culturally or, one-to-one in relationships. And I think that it's a function of, a patriarchal, puritanical culture where it's one way is the right way. It's very binary. There's no capacity for complexity, and the complexity of mothering is this it's constantly in my face. It's paradoxical at all times. It's miserable and it's ecstatic. It is profane and it is sacred. It is maddening and it is the most joyful thing I've ever experienced. It has blown me out of my body, like the most dissociated I've ever been, and it is the most embodied I've ever been. So it's like the support that I need and the work that I've had to do is to be witnessed in this complexity, in this paradox. One thing that I did for myself was I started having weekly 30-minute somatic experiencing sessions with a trained somatic experiencing practitioner. 30 minutes every week, no children, close the doors. I'm here for myself, to be in my body, to reset my nervous system. That was a profound turning point in my healing and my recovery. And it just gave me the capacity to be seen in this multifaceted experience that I'm living, and to not feel crazy, like to just be seen as like, of course. and just can you describe for me how this is feeling? Not explain it to me so I can tell you whether it's right or wrong. Just, I would like to know what your experience is. That is profound. It's very unusual support. It's not what most of us have available to us, but it's there, it's out there. And I imagine that most people in their postpartum window, like the person that they feel most supported by is lending support of that nature, where it's like, you don't have to explain yourself. I just am here to see you in your wholeness and your fragmentedness all at the same time.
I feel a shift just listening to you describe that, just being seen just as you are. It's really, yeah, I feel it in my body just listening to that.
Yeah, Stacey, I would say that was a clear answer. It was poetic and profound. So I feel very honored to witness you and just your commitment to be so steadfast in your work, and how that amplifies out, like it's this ripple effect of how, therefore, the work that you do supports every relationship that you're in. The integrity of it, the dynamic, and the qualities of it. So, well, I think my work and my journey has involved permission to grieve, permission to hold my inner child and say, like, well, of course you have these belief systems and this social conditioning. Like you had these experiences that left imprints on you, that created these stories and this narrative. And yes, it's required a lot of attention and a lot of focus to unravel so many of these held beliefs that are imposed by the society that we're raised in, right? By our cultural norms. And luckily, there's also a part of me that is a rebel, and I am no stranger to standing on the front line and advocating for human rights and our birthrights. And I hold both in a really delicate balance. And these parts of me show up every single day. Sometimes it's my inner child that needs the nurturing and the support. And sometimes it's this very radical, rebellious part of me, the advocate in me that really wants to be expressed. I think the key is to allow to give yourself permission to be expressed instead of repressed, to explore and allow permission for raw emotion. And again, to kind of circle back to the comment that I had just made regarding the connection and inquiry to the animal body. I'm, as a childbirth educator, professional, and somatic sexologist, I'm not interested in a right way to do anything. There's not a right way to birth. There's not a right way to motherhood. There's not a right way to any of this, but there's a wild way. And the wild woman archetype is the qualities of the wild woman archetype, I think, is a huge compliment to me in my work, in my path. And, she is primal. And I'm going to just read off a couple of things that I bulleted about this archetype. She's everything that the patriarchy fears about the feminine. She's primal. She's instinctual, animalistic. She's our untamed nature. She's free and without limits in your expression. She does not please others, including her own inner critic. She encourages a healthy relationship in our raw emotions. She encourages an embodiment of the raw emotions. And she releases us of our nice girl identity. She welcomes the angry, our angry. It's actually the wild woman archetypes. Superpower and strength is raw emotions and the permission to be angry and to like burn that down to the ground, that idea that we have to choose to be a good girl or a bad girl, which is the model that we're given, right? We're handed like, if you're a good girl, you're going to belong to society. You're going to be taken care of. You are going to, you become, what you compromise in that agreement is that you lose your own authority by being obedient to authority. You lose your own sovereignty in that agreement. And if you're a bad girl, if that's the decision that you make, you very much are in a place of not belonging and having to spend, your life and your energy being really unapologetic in your sovereignty and your own authority. And so I'm just creating space for all of these archetypes to inform me in reclaiming my wholeness and how I show up for myself, my family, my clients, my community. And that seems to be, it seems to be a really good place that I've arrived on this journey of fighting repression.
I find archetypes to be such an empowering place of acceptance for all the different facets of myself. And by connecting with others and hearing how they find healing and, just centering with understanding themselves, that there's not just like this one thing that we are. We have this sometimes, and then we also have this sometimes, and however we need to call those archetypes into being in order to truly and authentically express who we are in this moment, to me just gives a lot of love to the complexities of each one of us. But as you're talking about the wild woman archetype, just finding space to identify with that on a regular basis, to me feels like a way to counter the boxes that instinctively I may want to, or I may have pressure to sort of fit into, whether it's, the good mom or the responsible business owner or, the on top of it person, householder who's trying to manage everything. There's these, and I think all of that pressure to comfortably and successfully fit into those boxes just takes away the joy from actually just being and connecting and loving my partner and my children and experiencing all of the magnitude of pleasure available in life. It's really deep, powerful work. And also, like you said earlier, Stacey, it's actually quite simple in a way. There's like a simplicity to archetypal work.
Yeah, you mentioned that I should write a book, The Artistry of Bonding. And I think I will. I like that idea a lot. But another expression of me fighting the system of repression, right, is I've been thinking like we were given these books called, like this book series of what to expect when you're expecting, right? What to expect postpartum, and I'm just like, I want to write a book that is like what not to expect of me, what not to expect of me postpartum. And create a whole series of turning that upside down and again, reframing what our roles and responsibilities are. Like who wrote those rules? And it's time to rewrite them. So yeah.
I wrote those books.
What?
old white men who
Yeah,
won't give
old
birth.
white men wrote those books. So it's time to rewrite them. So before I get to the artistry of bonding, I'm going to fight the system of repression by reframing those roles and expectations on us. Yeah, just an expression of fighting societal conditioning and repression is it's a labor of love, actually. And I think, again, there's just a huge opportunity here to rewrite the expectations imposed on us. We get to reclaim that power. And, maybe for everybody it looks a little different, but I think it's an inquiry, a really important inquiry to explore for ourselves. And I mentioned earlier that I gave an example of the a lactating mother having this guilt, like becoming overcome with guilt that her breasts, if they were something that her spouse really loved spending time with, or her partner really loved spending time with, but she is overwhelmed with the stimulation and the sensitivity of nursing, that there's a narrative in her mind that, like, she has a duty, an expectation, a role and responsibility to show up in the same way that she did maybe pre-pregnancy or even during pregnancy. And I think this work is so powerful because we can capture her in that moment and say, wait, no, there's nothing wrong or bad about this. You don't need to adhere to this expectation. Let's just reframe it. Let's look at it differently. Let's tune into your animal body and determine what you need, what you want. And then again, explore this, create this container of artistry of bonding and connecting in a much more meaningful way, instead of a place of duty. That's a much more empowering way to navigate this whole experience.
And there's so many incidences of feeling pressure to please somebody else, whether it's, feeling uncomfortable and people coming and taking care of us after our babies are born. That's like a thing that it just, even though we know that we need the support, there's a layer of I'm asking too much that's there.
I also feel like there's, it's important that we have these conversations about giving voice to our desires and our needs and becoming embodied in our sense of autonomy and personal authority. And then there's also the very real pushback that is present for a lot of us when we do say, I need this, this is what I expect, this is what I want, this is what I hope for. And the pushback, or maybe like popping of that balloon by our community, like people don't show up or push back, that is important to kind of like prepare for or include in the conversation of like, how do you deal with disappointment and carry on and seek out new avenues of potential help. And this is where, on the one hand, I think there's a value in paid help because it is oftentimes someone who has more experience and knowledge about how to offer care in these really vulnerable times. But it's also like, I'm paying you, I can count on you showing up. And there's some value in that. There's like a nervous system element to that, where I'm not going to engage these old undealt with patterns with my mother or my family of origin, or, whomever else is not able to show up in the way that we need. Like in the postpartum window, I don't think that should be our focus. I don't think that should be the way that we spend our life force. So how about just engage someone who is going to show up totally for you? It's sort of a side note, but something that has been percolating in the background, and also this thought that's not a full shape yet, but with regards to sexuality and postpartum healing, where I think there's continued overlap is in the way that women primarily are taught that their value lies in being desirable, in being wanted, in being needed. And then how that translates into motherhood is I am needed. I have to stay here. I have to do this. I can't want my own, like our wants get washed away because there's such strong conditioning around our value being in being needed. And then, martyrdom comes in and mother guilt and all of that, all of those sticky layers that could be their own podcast series, let alone conversation.
Yeah. It's so true. It's so true. And I think we're all sort of, like it or not, needing to navigate through ways of being and ways of fighting with the structure that we're all sort of existing within. So whereas, in different times, there were just families that just were there for each other in different ways. And there was not this need for guilt or hesitation or, pleasing. I mean, I think that probably some of those things were there in different ways, but the way that we experience it now, where, as you were saying, like with paid support coming in, there's an exchange there. The exchange feels safe. The exchange feels equal. So we can relax a little bit into when it comes to receiving, where someone is just giving because they want to give or because they care about you and they want to give to you. That's like, there's something in there. There's a layer of, maybe it's unworthiness, or maybe it's indicative of like a feeling of weakness, or, stepping outside of our independence in a way that we've become really attached to. It's very interesting. And I think it's all so much a part of, postpartum recovery and transitioning into the parent role, but also like really coming into connection with our own sexual autonomy too. There's like, it's all wrapped up together in this like intricate layer upon layer that, you could draw points from. But I think what I'm just gaining so much from this is how each of you are sort of embodying those connections.
Yeah, coming into our sexual autonomy in the postpartum period. I like to argue that the postpartum period is the moment after you give birth. Like, you remain in different stages of postpartum for the duration of your life. And to circle back to the very first question that you asked, Christine, which was like how our work as somatic sexologists like intersects with the postpartum period. And I was 19 years postpartum, 19 or 20 years postpartum, when I participated in my first sexological bodywork intensive. And we spent a day in that 2-week intensive dedicated to the vulva, right? So we studied the anatomy and the physiology. We looked at the arousal of anatomy, which was also the very first time that I had ever heard that there had been a merging of sexual and reproductive health. So that was like a moment of epiphany. And I was receiving my very first vulva mapping. Are we good, Christine? And it was the very first time that I'd ever created the space, or a space had been created for me to even be present with this part of me, with my sexuality, and with this birth portal, with this incredibly profound part of me that I'd always had some level of disassociation from. And here I had a practitioner who was present with me, and there was no sexual energy, there was no pressure, there was no outcome. I got to just relax into my body. And we explored through vulva mapping and massage areas of sensation amnesia, areas of pleasure potential, areas of pain. And that was the very first time that I realized, like, oh, I actually have birth trauma. Like, I have some scar tissue in my left labia. Like, of course, yeah, I tore with my first baby. And here I am, like 2 decades later, before I'm even getting this addressed. And that was actually the moment that I'm like, I need to specialize in this, and I need to bring this to women like 12 weeks postpartum, not 20 years later. Like, this needs to be part of our protocol, in my opinion. And I think it's through experiences like that, of being present with the tissue, working with scar tissue remediation, working with all of these different protocols that are built into somatic sexology and sex education, is actually maybe the only way that you can really claim sexual autonomy for yourself. With all the other things like agency and consent, these are all other parts that funnel into this incredible body of work. And so that's where I've found it. It's in this field, and I think it's just time that everyone has access to this, especially birthing mamas, and especially in the postpartum period.
Amen.
Absolutely. I am just so honored that both of you chose to spend this time with me and sharing this conversation. I do feel like there's so many sub conversations that can go far. But I do feel like through this time that we've spent together, I feel like I have gained so much just by listening to you and your perspectives, your practices, and really recognizing that it's all us navigating life in the way that we are ready to navigate it. And just like in, finding balance, it's not this end point that you arrive to and you just stay there. We just continually evolve and grow and connect and understand ourselves better, and kind of renew each time we go through a life transition. We get to rediscover. So I thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for being here with me today.
What a pleasure, Christine, Gal. It was amazing to be here with you in this conversation.
Thank you again so much for the invitation, Christine. It is such an honor. I have so much respect for you and what you contribute to community and to women's reproductive health, postpartum, sacred window. And Stacey, wow, you and I are a rare breed, what we're doing. There's probably, I would say, a dozen of us, maybe even on the planet, who do exactly what you and I do. And so it's an honor to be on the front line with both of you. And thank you, Christine. If you want to explore some more conversations, I would be, super happy.
Yes.
Join you.
We definitely need to do that. I urge you all listening to visit Stacey and Gal on their websites one more time, staceyramsower.com and venusnoir.com for Gal, and be well. Thank you again.
Oh.
can you bring something sacred to your current window of time? What do you have to offer to someone within their sacred window? We honor you for all you give and for who you are. Thank you for listening. The Sacred Window podcast is brought to you by the Center for Sacred Window Studies. You can visit us to find out more about our online training and mentoring programs, plus resources and products for and about the sacred postpartum window at www.sacredwindowstudies.com. Editing of our podcast recordings is done by Sienna Butler, and our music is written and performed by Sarah Emmett. You can hear more of Sarah's music by visiting www.sarahemmett.bandcamp.com.